This experience happened to me such a long time ago, but it's still quite vivid in my memory. I had graduated high school a few months before and had just turned 18. I was dating Nick, my high school sweetheart. He was 2 grades ahead of me, but we had been together since my freshman year. It was close to midnight. Nick and I had just left the movie theater and had to pick up Eddie from his job. Nick's cousin Eddie had just bought a new car and let Nick and I borrow it so we could go hang out. Nick parked in the lot of the restaurant where Eddie worked. Eddie still had about 15 minutes left to go in his shift, but brought us out free popcorn, chicken, and cheese sticks for us to eat while we waited. When it was time to go, I moved to the back seat so that Nick could ride up front while Eddie drove us home. Eddie's car was a coupe, so I literally had to climb over the folded front passenger seat. The quickest route home was on the expressway. The second quickest was on the road that weaved and curved throughout the park, normally a difference of about 7 or 8 minutes. Eddie declared that in his new car, he could make up those minutes and get through the park drive in the same amount of time as the expressway. Nick decided to challenge Eddie and bet him $50 that he couldn't. I wish I could say I was wise enough to protest against the idea, but even though I was afraid, I said nothing. Virtually nobody was on the road at that time. I really wish there were, though. I wish there was a local football game that night that had traffic backed up and the usual police checkpoints to ensure everyone was following protocol. But there weren't. Eddie tore around those curves in that sports car like a madman. Nick was laughing and taunting him. I was scared as hell, so I finally spoke up and demanded that Eddie slow down. They both reassured me that everything would be okay. Then, the last thing I remember was closing my eyes and tucking my head down toward my lap. Then I blacked out. I remember losing and regaining consciousness repeatedly in the back seat. Then at one point, Nick said something to me, though I couldn't understand what it was. Nick opened the passenger door, folded his seat down, and then pulled me out from the back seat. I remember crawling out and looking back at the car. It was upside down on its roof. Nick carried me a few yards away and propped me up against a nearby tree. I asked him if he was okay. He said he was just shaken up. I asked him about Eddie. He said he would go back to check on him. As my boyfriend walked back to the car, I blacked out again. I must have been out for a while. When I woke back up, police and medics were already on the scene. I called out for help. An officer approached me. The officer asked me if I had been hit by Eddie's car. When I told him I was one of the passengers, he asked me how I managed to get out. I told him about Nick pulling me from the back seat and carrying me to where I lay. He didn't say anything, but I could tell the officer didn't believe me. I asked him about my boyfriend and his cousin. The officer told me I would be updated on their condition soon. At that moment, the medics wanted to examine the extent of my injuries. It wasn't until the next afternoon, when detectives came to my hospital room, that I was given the tragic news. I was told Nick and Eddie both passed away on the scene, likely on impact. But I knew that wasn't true. I kept asking detectives what was going on. They kept asking me if I was sure I was riding in the back seat. Through my tears, I kept retelling the same story about Nick carrying me from the car, and I kept being retold that was impossible. The police report read that I was ejected from the car at some point while it tumbled over and over. But I knew that wasn't true. I was there, and even though it was difficult for me to explain, I know exactly what I experienced.